Well, I think it's often useful to start right at the top. In other words, with the very big issues. And for me, the big issue is very simple, and that is the science that has developed in the last 200-300 years has proven to be the most reliable way that humans have found of acquiring knowledge. And it's the process by which that science is done that gives us confidence in the sort of knowledge that science gives us. And of course, if one thinks of the role of human knowledge, reliable knowledge in human history, it's the means whereby the betterment of the human species has happened. It's also, of course, been the means whereby the disbetterment of the human species has happened too. Knowledge, remember the lady who had the box, and which all the truth flew, then it was for good and it's for evil, and it's for us to choose. How to move it, shall I? And as a consequence, what many of us would argue, but because science has also become such a powerful agent in human society, it has profoundly influenced society in the recent past. It continues to do so. It will do so even more powerfully in the future. Then this is an issue of democracy. It's actually, if you like, a separate state has evolved, which we might call the state of science, which invents things, which have uses, which have massive implications for human society. And therefore, in a democratic state, should it not be true that the doing of science is much more open to our fellow citizens? And this is an attempt to map out what we mean by open science. And it means three things. It means doing it openly, as to say, in a sense, sharing with our fellow citizens what it is we should do and why we do it. Because, of course, they pay for us. They pay our salaries, and they're paid to research them. That science generates evidence, like data, and those sorts of data that are created. They're created by data held by public authorities, by government, public sector data generated by governmental laboratories, and of course the research data that we're talking about primarily. The third component of open science is open access. The access of everyone readily to the sorts of information that science generates. And one might think of the whole of this, of researchers, citizens, businesses, government, all of them contributing what we might think of as science as a public, and not a private enterprise, not a Mandarin enterprise. A little history. Just wondering where Danny. A little history is often very useful. This man is Henry Oldenburg. He was a German theologian who happened to be appointed as the first secretary of the newly formed Royal Society in London in the early 1660s. Henry was a very enthusiastic correspondent. He corresponded with people we would now call scientists all over Europe and beyond. And he thought it would be a good idea if his correspondence was not private, but public. And he persuaded the new society that it would be a good idea to publish this correspondence. And it was done through this whoops. Sorry,
the other way around.
The other way around. It was done by this journal, the Philosophical Transactions, which is still a front-rank scientific journal. And Henry required two things of people who sent letters to him to be published openly for the first time. The first was that it should be in the vernacular and not in Latin. Rather radical step in those days. But secondly, and crucially important, that the concept idea must be accompanied with the evidence. He also, of course, introduced peer review, where he always sent it to fellows of society to have a look at, to say, is this nonsense? The crucial thing which he did is to say evidence and concept must be presented together. I'm rather worried about that. One thing that Henry didn't anticipate, however, is something that we're talking about. But in my scientific career, we moved from a situation where the tools under my control to collect information have become much, much more powerful. We now have means to acquire data on a completely unprecedented scale, to manipulate it, to visualize it, to use it in complicated ways that were never before possible. And that's created really quite severe problems. And this is one of them. This is what I do. I'm a geologist, a geophysicist. I work on big ice sheets and glaciers. And about, precisely 35 years ago, we published a short paper in Nature which had 7 hard-won data points from Antarctica. And we were able to say exactly how we collected the data. The data was presented. We analyzed the uncertainties. We determined the error, the magnitude of the error bars. And it was open for others to scrutinize, to disagree, to add information to improve the theory. And they both added new information, and they improved the theory. So the principle of scrutiny, which is the principle that has become known as scientific self-correction, when you observe Henry Oldenburg's rule, concept and data, it permits others to review what you've done, to scrutinize it carefully, to identify errors, to correct them, to demonstrate you're completely wrong, or verify what you've done and move on. Now, over the last 5 years, my group has been doing another experiment in Antarctica, using modern methods of data acquisition, seismic geophysical methods. Rather than 7 data points, we've got about 7 petabytes of data. Even the columns of Nature are not big enough to hold that data. So how do I adhere to Henry's principle? And the reality is, we as scientists over the last 30 years, whilst this process has been happening, have not adhered to the principle. Data and evidence, if you like, and the concept have come apart. And some of the consequences have been quite severe. This is data from a paper in Nature published just over a year ago now, which took the 50 benchmark papers in preclinical oncology, key area of medical research, and attempted to replicate the results. They only managed to replicate the results in about 11% of cases. In other words, 89% they couldn't. Now, it wasn't necessarily because the papers were wrong, although in some cases they were. It was because the data wasn't there, or only partially presented, or the metadata, that is the data about data, were inadequate to be able to use the results. Now, if our fellow citizens became aware that this was happening, frankly, there would be a crisis of confidence in science, which might even be unprecedented. If popular Italian, British, American, Chinese newspapers were aware of the issue, then there really would be some severe consequences. And certainly many young scientists whose work is based on the established work of established scientists are getting increasingly concerned about the inadequacy of this issue. So there are 2 fundamental principles. First one is that the data and the evidence must be concurrently published. It's not, wouldn't it be nice if they were concurrently published? They must be concurrently published. Otherwise, a fundamental principle of science is undermined, and I would argue that non-publication of the evidence concurrently with the concept is actually malpractice. I'm afraid most of us are doing it, and we shouldn't. Well, that's the bad side of the coin. What about the benefits? Well, the benefits are in reality now enormous and potentially much greater. This is an example of a whole series of databases in areas which are cognate to some parts of the life sciences. Some of it is data about location, some of it is data about species distributions, and many other things. And it is an extraordinary opportunity. If we're able to link the elements of those databases together in ways that are not trivial. Google, when you use it, all it does, it collects that data, establishes it for you because you use a keyword. If, however, we can create semantic linkages between those databases, then we can use those databases to ask profoundly intelligent questions about the whole assemblage of data and get a much deeper understanding of the properties of processes and systems at a very much deeper level. And there are some areas where that's happening extremely well. But there are some challenges, some technical challenges we have to overcome, which are not trivial in order to be able to do that. But one of the things that most of us haven't really realized is that in this new data universe, we have to do our science in ways that are different from the ways we've done it in the past. This is a quotation from Jim Gray, who is one of the gurus of modern data science. Jim writes, when you look at what we do day in, day out, in terms of data analysis, it's dreadful. We don't do it well. But we don't do it well because our reasoning is based on the reasoning that we used to deploy when we had a simple experiment with two variables, we had some consequences, or we create an equation to relate cause and effect. Actually, it doesn't work like that if you have a complex series of interrelated data. And we need to develop Bayesian reasoning to begin with. We need to go back to some statistical approaches, which to some degree we don't really develop in our graduates in the way we used to 30 years ago. And we need to utilize modern statistics in new ways. And we need a new breed of data scientists who are going to be the new librarians of that whole post-Gutenberg world. Because of Gutenberg's technology was a disruptive technology that changed the world actually. Gutenberg's technology now for science is in the past. It's gone. We are living in the post-Gutenberg world whether we like it or not. And there are great benefits in open communication of data. I've listed them here, but I'll just go through them one by one. This is an example of something which I'm sure many of you know about. It's the Elixir project, which is funded by the European Union and some national bodies. And essentially, it is to build on the fact that in the last 10 years, the bioinformatics community has discovered that if they share their data, even at the moment of initiation, in other words, you don't even wait for the first paper to be published, if they share their data, individual scientists, including young scientists, find that they have a more valuable personal resource than they would have if they simply hugged their own data to their chest. One of the things one hears from many young scientists in many fields, and I'm glad to say not in this field, is they say, if only I had my hands on the data that grey-bearded old scientist has got, that aging professor has got, I could do a much better job with it. And essentially what they've done is create a series of hubs, national hubs, national nodes, and a major hub, which ensures that they have the infrastructure they need to do their science, some of the computing capacity, the tools, and the standards and training, and all those things are very important. And it's an example of the way in which science can be done very much better. Another one, really an analogous argument to the one we had yesterday about SARS, is the speed with which that severe gastrointestinal infection in Hamburg, which was an E. coli species produced and the rapidity of work by individual national laboratories and their collaboration meant that within 4 months, strains had been identified, and the information is in the hands of public health authorities worldwide to be able to deal with the outbreak. And that's crucial. And of course, it's also an example for many other global challenges that face us at the present day. This is the headline from the Guardian newspaper about 9 months ago. The Guardian is a very respectable, reputed English newspaper that takes science very seriously. Scientific fraud is right, science is broken. And we'll all be aware of the many examples of fraud that have been in recent years. Very often, it's fraud associated with inventing data. Why does it happen? It's very simple. And that is that the rewards for doing science, the scientific achievement is now very great, probably greater than they ever have been. Fraud, of course, has been happening ever since science began. But it's actually particularly noticeable at the present. And whereas on the one hand, it's important that individuals should have a sense of personal integrity, the system needs integrity as well. For us at least, open data helps the system to have integrity. If you have to share your data, it underlies your paper in ways that others will scrutinize. The probability of your being found out is very much higher. For a policeman, you know that the probability of being found out is a major deterrent of crime. That ought to be true for data donated as well. This is a wonderful example of how sharing ideas, sharing data can be immensely creative. This man is Tim Gowers, who is a Fields Medalist mathematician. Fields Medal is equivalent to a Nobel Prize in mathematics. And about 3 years ago, Tim put on his blog site an idea that he had for the solution of a long-standing mathematical problem that's been around for about 100 years. And within 30 days, he had something like 800 communications from about 30 collaborators all the way across the world, suggesting new ideas which were quickly discussed by this self-assembling community. Many of them were rejected quickly, some picked up and developed. That key idea came from an ordinary secondary school mathematics teacher in Oregon, not a university person, no big degree, ordinary mathematics teacher. And Tim reckoned that within 30 days, they'd solve the problem. They'd not only solve the original problem, it was a more difficult generalization of the problem. He commented, it's like driving a car. Normal research is like pushing it. So why do we do more of this? The answer is very simple. It's because the criteria for credit and promotion stop it. You and I will be credited and promoted because of our paper in Nature or Science with our name on the front. If we just do something which creates a brilliant idea and we're just part of it, and how do you allocate credit? Well, there are ways of doing it. And our view is that actually we should press on with those ways of allocating credit. And of course, there's also another area which has already been alluded to, and that's this area of so-called citizen science, where our fellow citizens, who may not have been trained in science, don't do a scientific job, because some of them do, get involved in serious scientific projects. So if you want to find a new planet, then what you don't do is go to some fancy academic observatory. You put a request on something called Galaxy Zoo, which is a public science project, and you get amateur scientists in Edinburgh, in Bremen, in Yokohama, in wherever, working on the data that's made available to them. And actually, they're the ones who find it. This is an example of a problem we have in Britain, and also across much of Northern Europe at the moment, which is the disease of the ash tree. What's the Italian for ash?
Cenere.
Oh, cenere, that's some birch. Never mind, later. We'll do it later.
Where?
It's ash tree. The ash tree is dying across Europe. And the data you see here is not collected by any national authority because it doesn't have the resources to do so. It's collected by literally thousands of amateurs who send in the data and are also involved in the evaluation of the data. So they feel part of it. And our view is that this trend of so-called citizen science might, in a way, fundamentally change the social dynamics of science. And it all comes from making the scientific base available and open to others so that they can use it and indeed contribute to it. And they have standards of rigor which are really very impressive indeed. And those standards of rigor sometimes are really professional science that they apply in ways that you should. Economic benefits, of course, we recognise. And the bodies that recognise the benefits of big data. They're the big supermarket chains, they're the retailers, you name it. These are some estimations of the values that have been put on the right. The potential value of US healthcare, $300 billion a year, which is greater than the annual healthcare spending in Spain. $250 billion a year, which is the value of the European public sector administration, which is bigger than the GDP of Greece. For many in industry, then they think of data as the new oil. It's a major driver. And of course, we ought to care about that in a positive way, in addition to the rather negative ways we were talking about it earlier. Because if we could make the use of the knowledge that we have more efficient, it means that we're paying less for it. We should all care about efficiency, I think, in understanding things. And of course, efficiency in transmitting these things. And another area, of course, is that our fellow citizens, who are now better educated than they have ever been, they're no longer prepared simply to listen as dumb auditors to some fancy scientist telling them to believe this and to believe that. In areas where their own interests are involved, particularly say in medical areas, or which impose costs on society, they want to know what the evidence is that these scientific sets are true. I was involved in a review, some of you might know about Climate Gate, which was the emails that were released from the University of Anagni, which appeared to illustrate scientific fraud. And one of the real problems that arose because of that was because the scientists themselves had not been open about their data. In fact, they weren't guilty of fraud, they were guilty of not being open. And it got into very, very deep water simply because concerned citizens thought that they were really trying to mislead. If one of my daughters were holding this, she'd be much more efficient to make it work. Pretend you're my daughter. And already we've talked about global challenges and really openness in relation to global challenges, such as the ones that illustrated yesterday at the start. I mean, clearly there is a global public interest in ensuring that we're able to address some of these challenges in more efficient and more effective ways. But there are boundaries, and we already have one of the boundaries of openness illustrated this morning. And the boundaries are commercial interests. It is proper that knowledge that we have is utilized in a sufficient way for benefit. And much of that knowledge will be utilized in the commercial domain. It's important that to all extents possible we attempt to protect the privacy of individuals. One of the most glaring dangers there, of course, is the danger to insurance. Insurance works when it's a lottery, when chance is at work. If you undermine the principle of insurance, eventually the insurance company has knowledge about you, which is private knowledge. Really quite fundamental issues. And safety and security, which we talked a little about yesterday. All those three are important. But if you ask a lawyer, let's say a European Commission lawyer, to set down some regulations and laws that would determine what those boundaries would look like, you would have a book that was 900 pages thick. All those boundaries are fuzzy and difficult, and negotiating and legitimizing those boundaries is a real problem. And one of the difficulties is that because the difficulty of identifying the boundary is so great, what it might do is cast a shadow on the principle of openness. People might say, because we can't define very well where the boundary lies, all this openness should be shut down. Well, this is one of those domains where the balance of interest is most important. Who benefits? You personally. But one of the important issues that we address in our report is that openness of itself has zero value unless the following, those four criteria are observed. First of all, the data has got to be accessible. You've got to get at it. You can know where it is. And that itself is a problem. Secondly, it's got to be intelligible. But intelligible to whom? In my field, I don't need much metadata. I don't need much background information from someone in my field who gives me data for me to be able to use it. If, however, my neighbour, who is not a scientist, wanted to understand it, then the amount of background information he and she will require will be far, far greater. So the issue of intelligibility is crucial. Now, the European Commission at the moment is setting up for Horizon 2020 the view that all the data that's generated through European Union grants should be open. Why? Because your fellow citizens have paid for it. My view is that that is an absolutely pointless exercise. It has no value whatsoever unless you make it intelligible. How do you make it intelligible to your fellow citizens? The answer is by putting a tremendous amount of effort into the background information. If you did that, science would stop tomorrow. We'd all be creating background information for our fellow citizens. But actually, they don't care about 99% of the science we do. What they want is stuff that interests them. In other words, that material, that is in the public interest. Now the question is, who decides what's in the public interest? Which is an easy one. But actually, you can make a first guess. How do you do it? Read the newspapers. What do people care about? It's really it's climate change situation, it's care of hospitals, it's energy. But what we ought to be doing is ensuring that we can make things intelligible to our fellow citizens in areas they care about, and intelligible to fellow scientists in ways that are relatively more easy. And it must be accessible, and you've got to be able to use it again. And only when those criteria are properly open do we say that it is intelligently open. And who would wish not to be intelligent? Well, I think we should be intelligent and make sure we are. So, where do the responsibilities lie for delivering these sorts of priorities? Well, they lie with us, with scientists. And what's the first priority for us? We've got to change the way we think. I mustn't think anymore about it being my data. I've worked hard for this code. I've started this code for a long time with some friends, whiskey. Terrible. It's mine, I've got it. But actually it's not. I'm holding it on behalf of society because society is paid. It's what we do. It's what we ought to be doing. We are simply acting as agents of society and generating the knowledge that society needs for its own betterment. Then there's society to reform. Because if I think where my allegiance lies as a scientist, then some of it is to my institution, my university. Actually, most of it is to my discipline. Most of my allegiance is to my colleagues in the working on the same sorts of things. So the learner societies have a very important role to play. They are the ones who represent the principles and the practices of individual disciplines. They need to be involved in this, and they need to be thinking hard about how they should set principles and priorities for their disciplines. Of course, universities and institutes are very important. I said earlier that one of the things that stops collaboration are the criteria for promotion. And so things like incentives and promotion criteria need to be thought about quite deeply. Universities also need to think about their libraries. We have a big science library in Edinburgh that actually is staffed by the wrong people doing the wrong things. Most of my students have never touched a book. The only function the library has is to pay the subscription to electronic journals. And the people, although classical library skills defined generically are important, of knowing where stuff is, knowing how it interrelates, showing how to abstract evidence, are all important. Actually, you have to do it in a different way in the post-Gutenberg world. And training is mathematical, statistical, informatics training. The funders of research need to mandate what we call intelligent openness, that's crucial, and publishers really must move to mandating concurrent open deposition of data. But one has to be careful. We have to move. The process by which we do these things is a process of persuasion. It's not a process of papal edict. For example, I spoke earlier about the way in which the bioinformatics community, if you like, discovered for themselves the power of open data. The journal Nature went into a dialogue with the bioinformatics community. Nature said, what we would like to do is to ensure that there is concurrent deposition of data at the time that we publish a paper. But we're not going to demand it. We want you to work with us in order to establish how it will be done. So I think those moves like that are really crucial. But also, if we think, what is this data we're talking about? Where is this data? And the answer is it's in lots of places. It's on my laboratory bench and yours. It's in national databases. It's in subject-specific databases. This is our little pyramid. That's what we have individually on our desks. These are the institutions that we belong to, our university institutes. These are national data centers. These are major international centers. If you ask, where do those come from? They come from here. They go bottom up, because some clever person had an interesting idea. Wouldn't it be good to collect data in this way, and manipulate it in this way? And their colleagues would say, yes, that's a good idea, let's collaborate in doing it. Before that's happened, the whole thing is floated up to the international level. There's also a massive data loss, and it happens here in institutions. When some of us are getting older, retire, what happens to all this stuff that we collected? It disappears. It goes out into the dustbin. And actually, pulling this out is important because it's been calculated that the sum of big data, like CERN, like major national laboratories, is actually less than the sum of little data. At any lab, at some other laboratory, actually huge one. And that's, of course, where the loss takes place. Should we be moving to single, massive international repositories? Absolutely not. What we have to do is to recognize that this data universe is an ecology with undergrowth, big trees, and actually what we don't want to do is just have big trees. We want the whole system to be rather more lively, rather more interactive. And the key question is, how do we cope with that? How do we deal with it? How do we manage it? In producing the report on which most of my talk is based, we talked a great deal to young scientists. And it was interesting that their attitudes were often quite different from those of more senior scientists. And of course, they are data should be thought of not as a personal thing, but a broad public enterprise. They thought intelligent openness at the time of publication was fine. Interestingly, they said this: science data should be as easy to remix as CDs are to a disc jockey. And actually, then a great deal of focus is placed at the moment on standards. Actually, what they're saying, and what some of the more esteemed faculty say, actually, maybe focusing on standards is the wrong idea. What we should be looking for is ways of utilizing heterogeneous data from a diversity of sources without having to fatten it into the same form. And one of the crucial issues that we learned from the past is you have a big issue like this that is rapidly evolving. What you don't do is over-engineer it. In other words, you have a top-down analysis of this, what I call the data ecology, and you have some clever person, some civil secretary, a minister, worst of all, saying, this is how we're going to manage the whole system. That would be an utter disaster. What would it do? It would stifle and stop creativity, and it would waste public money on a massive scale. What you have to think about is what is the highest common denominator? What are the processes down in the system that are going to be long-lived, irrespective of what happens? Which are the ones that could change very quickly and very easily? So plan for those things which is intelligent to plan for, and you can free them to other things to evolve and develop, because people are creative. It's easy to say that, and actually much more difficult to do. And I might mention how that might be done. These are just some tools that we need in ensuring that we can utilize this great universe in an intelligent way, and you'll be very aware that many of them, there are many of us who are trying to ensure that both nationally and internationally, some of these tools are the real focus of major research. Data integration, this one, is an absolutely crucial issue, and there's some very exciting research going on in this area. It's how you get semantic relationships between heterogeneous data. And there are some important international developments. G8 meeting, which took place in May or June this year, your science minister who was there, she signed up to this statement, part of which said, to the greatest extent and with the fewest constraints possible, publicly funded scientific research data should be open. And the national academies in the G8 countries were there at the same time. And what's now happening is the national academies being asked, okay, how do we do that? The intelligent minister asks that question downwards, while the foolish minister decides himself what they're going to do. We'll just hope there aren't many foolish ministers. There's a major research data alliance involving at the moment the USA, UK, and Australia, that was launched earlier this year, which is to try to make our national systems interoperate. The International Scientific Union's ICSU, this says DODEC, but it's actually CODEX, or something you may be familiar with it. It's becoming a priority for them. The European Union has an open data strategy, and individual countries, some individual countries have national priorities and national strategies, and I think Italy should have one. And I took part in a telephone conference with a meeting that took place in London yesterday. It was all about how we're going to create a national strategy. And what we're going to do to begin with is have a forum in which we have all those individual component parts represented, saying, okay, what are the barriers to achieving these sorts of things? What national capability we need to focus on? And I think that ought to be Italian proud. This is just an indication of something that could be done. And could be done really pretty easily and pretty quickly. At the moment, of course, there's a major focus on open access publishing. And those of you that have done this will realize potential which open data and open access have when put together. So, for example, some of the PubMed material, you can read the article, and at the same time, through the article, you can access the data, you can manipulate it, you can check the graphs and curves and relationships that paper has. I mean, it's a very, very powerful tool. What we could have, will be quite quickly, I hope, is all the literature is online, all the data is open and online, and they're able to interoperate. One of the problems, of course, at the moment is the publishers, the scientific publishers. At the moment, we have tools in our hands for text and data mining from the journals that our institutions pay for, but the companies tell us you can't do it. We say why? Oh, they say you'll have real problems on mainframe computing. That's nonsense. It just isn't true. What they've been told by their lawyers is there may be money in this. Hold it back. And actually, at the moment, the European Commission, I'm afraid, it has been lobbied strongly by the science publishers, and the Commission says the release, at the moment at least, they think that the release of data ought to be with a contract, a new contract with the companies, which would be a disaster. What's happened across Europe is many science academies have written into the Commission in favour of submitting word and saying, you must write. Say, look, this is great. The UK Parliament at the moment is discussing to have an opt-out if this were to happen, so that we won't let publishers stop us from data mining and text mining. That really is And to finish with, I just a little bit like this. This is a report that we published about a year ago, which as I imagine what I've said, it was drawn and it's accessible readily on the web. So, in my view, this is the way science is moving. And what is crucially important is that we should make sure individual science communities don't get left behind. And that really is about understanding what is involved, understanding the potential benefits, which are enormous, making sure that we can create the infrastructure and undertake the training that's needed for younger scientists in particular to make great contributors, actually opening the whole thing up. And I think just to return to what I said at the beginning, I think this is